Okay, we are on Chapter 11, Lesson 1, Customary Units of Length. So today we're measuring length of things. Length is a measurement of a line between 2 points. Inch, foot, and yard are units that are part of the customary system for measure for length. Okay, so we're going to measure some objects, and we're going to measure them to the 1 inch to ½ inch and the 1/4 inch, and they're just more specific forms of measure. So if it's like rounding, and whether you're rounding to the hundreds, the tens, or the ones place. So if we're rounding to the nearest inch, we're going to be looking at the ones on the ruler that have the numbers. If we're rounding to the ½ inch, we're looking, is it closer to the half, the whole, anything that's halfway in between, or the actual number. If we're looking at the 1/4, you'll see this nice long one between is the half, and you'll also notice halfway in between the half there's another one that's slightly longer than the other ones. That's the 1/4 inch. So there's 1/4, the half would be 2/4, there would be 3/4. See how that one's a little bit longer than the other ones? And then there's the 1. So if you split the half in half, then you're going to get the 1/4 inches, and that's the different ways to measure. And obviously if you're measuring to the 1/4 inch, you have a smaller error rate, you have a more precise measurement than if you're rounding to the nearest inch. So for more precise measurements, you're going to want to round to the 1/4 or the half, but the 1 inch is the easiest one to measure to. Okay, so that's how, and this is the inch side of the ruler. If you've got a ruler that has 2 sides and this one is, they're very small, like the width of your pinky, then that is the centimeter side. And for the customary units, like this chapter, we're not using the metric system, we're using the customary, the inches. So I want to show you, before we get too far in, I want to show you the correct way to measure, because over the years I've noticed that kids have apparently not used a lot of rulers, so measuring with rulers is a challenge. You think you just kind of line it up and you're good, but you have to line it up in the proper way. So what you need to do is, some rulers will have a 0 on one end. This one doesn't, but it has this long dark line right at the edge, which means the edge of the ruler in this case is the 0. And so I want to line that 0 up with one side of the object that I'm measuring. So for the first example on this, I want to measure the butterfly. I have to line my ruler up. I can't just line up the ruler anywhere, because I could make it look like it's 5 inches long, and that's not correct. So I have to match this side that has the 0, or the 0 on your ruler if it's not the edge, up with the side of the object. And this is nice because they've actually given us the lines that we're lining up with. So I'm going to line my ruler up the edge here. I'm going to keep my ruler straight. This doesn't help. This doesn't help. I'm going to line my ruler up straight, edge of the ruler, and now I can see where the other edge of that butterfly is. And you'll notice, if you look at this line, here's the 3, and back here is the 2. So it's not directly on the 2 or the 3. It's in between those. But if I'm rounding to the nearest inch, I'm going to round up to the 3, because where this line is, it's closer to the 3 than it is back to the 2. Okay, now I'm going to say, okay, that is 3 inches. That's one measurement. 3 inches. It's a little pale there. Okay, now it says I have to also measure it to the ½ inch. And I see here is my 2½. That is the slightly longer line here. And I can see that it is closer to the 2½ than it is to the 3. Just barely. That's a really close one. But it is slightly closer to the 2½. So my next measurement, which it would be measuring to the rounding to the half, I'm going to put 2½ So first I measured and rounded to the nearest inch and got 3. then I put my semicolon. My second answer is 2.5, rounding to the nearest half. Now my last measurement, because on the directions it says, and I'll show you, measure each to the nearest inch, half inch, and quarter inch. So that's what I'm doing here. I've got my inch, my half inch, and now I'm going to line up my ruler again and go to the nearest quarter inch. So again, to the 0, matching that line. Now tracking out to the other edge of the object, I can see it's very, very close to this line here, which is slightly longer than all the other ones. And since this line is closest to the 3, I know that's 2 3/4. So again, I've got 2, 2 1/4, 2.5 or 2 2/4, and this would be 2 3/4. So my final measurement, rounded to the quarter inch, is going to be 2 3/4, 3/4 inches. So you'll have 3 different answers because we're measuring it to the nearest inch, half inch, and quarter inch. A lot of people, when they're doing this page, they get one answer and, okay, I'm done. But no, you actually need to measure it. You don't need to measure 3 times, you need to round 3 times. First, you're going to get the most, this is actually the most general, and it's the easiest. So it is the least accurate. Least accurate. And over here, when we measure to the quarter inch, this is the most precise. So those are the 3 numbers we're rounding: inch, half inch, and quarter inch. And we're going to do that on all the problems where we have this direction, measure to the nearest inch, half inch, and quarter inch. So that's one thing I wanted to show you with this page, because the ruler and using it properly is going to be the big lesson for this, and making sure that we're lined up with the 0 on one side and that ruler is straight. Don't want it like this, don't want it like that. We want a straight ruler, and we want the edge on the 0 as well when we're measuring. Okay, so that's something, the key, before we really get into this. Okay, measure, what are we? Actual size of the neon damsel marine fish is shown. How long is this fish to the nearest inch, half inch, and quarter inch? Okay, so I've got my first page of my text, which is 697, and I'm going to use my ruler to measure this picture of the damselfish. And one thing that can be nice to do, because on this picture, unlike on the butterfly where they gave us this nice line with the marks on the side, it didn't give us that on this one. So I'm going to go ahead and draw them, because that makes it easier for me when I'm measuring. So I'm going to go move my ruler until I really can't, just barely, the yellow disappears, and that's where I'm going to draw a nice long line so that I can keep track. And then I'm going to go to the very edge of the tail fin, and I'm going to draw a nice long line there. And that'll help me make sure that I'm at the edges of the fish, this damsel fish. Now I'm going to line up my ruler, the 0 edge to one side, and then I'm going to keep my ruler as straight as I can and look to the other side of the fish on the other line here, where it matches up on the ruler. And what you'll see is it's not directly on the 1 or the 2. It's in between the 1 and the 2. So it's going to be a fraction greater than 1 and less than 2, which is why we were doing those on all those fractions and decimals before. Okay, so one thing, if I'm measuring it to the nearest inch, like it says here, I can see, is it closer to the 1 or is it closer to the 2? Well, it's closer to the 2. So I'm going to put my measurement, nearest inch is 2. Now I'm going to go to the nearest half inch, and I see 1 is here, 1.5 is here, and 2 is here. It's not closest to 1, it's past the 1.5, So I'm going to compare between the 1.5 and the 2. And by my estimation, it's just a small gap. Here's my gap for 1.5, and here's my gap for 2. Now if I look at it that way, zoom in a little bit. Here's the gap at 1.5. Here's the gap at 2. So this is obviously a smaller jump. So my estimate to the nearest 1/2 inch is 1.5. Okay, so now I'm going to try and line my ruler up with that 0 again just perfectly. Oh good, because there's my 0, there's my 1/2. My 1/2 lines up, so I must be have my ruler in the same place. Got to keep that right. Okay, so I've got this in the right place. I'm still trying to measure my 1/4 inch. And what I'm seeing here is my 1.5, my 2, and my 1 3/4 is right in between those. So this line is almost exactly on 1 3/4. So my last measurement when I'm estimating to the nearest 1/4 inch is going to be 1 3/4 inches. And that's how I'm measuring between the inch, the 1/2 inch, and the 1/4 inch for this page. Okay, so what I wanted to show you on this page also is how to estimate. And on these examples, they'll give you estimates that are fairly clear as far as which is reasonable. And if we're looking at a caterpillar, we can kind of tell by the setting that it's in. It's on this plant with a bunch of leaves, and we know how big most leaves are, even though jungle leaves can be very big. But you can kind of tell that this is not a very large picture of a very big thing. And you've got 2 yards, which according to our estimates that are shown on this page would be basically the height of 2 chairs. So obviously a caterpillar is not going to be the length of 2 chairs stacked on top of each other. That is much bigger than the caterpillar would be. 20 feet, if we had 20 of these rulers, that would be 20 feet. And that's larger than the length of most walls on rooms. So that is much bigger also than a caterpillar would be. If this is 10 inches on the ruler from the end of the ruler to my thumb, that's 10 inches, so imagine double that. That is also much bigger than an average caterpillar would be. So the most reasonable estimate for the length of the caterpillar would be about 2 inches. That, given the options, is the most reasonable estimate. So I would mark, for example, I would mark 2 inches as the most reasonable estimate for the length of this insect. And you'll have to do it on the bike. They're talking about, they're not asking you to measure this picture of the bike on this page. They're asking you if you were thinking about a real bike, would it make sense that it's about 12 inches? That is why, is this how big a bike normally is? 4 feet, which is about your height, a little bit over, a little bit under. 12 feet, which is a little bit longer than a wall in a room. Or 4 yards, which is, you'd have to imagine 4 chairs stacked on top of each other, which is about the height of some rooms. So from the floor to the ceiling would be close to that. What would be a reasonable estimate for an average person's bike? So you're not actually measuring this picture of the bike, you're making an estimate for that. And I already showed you about measuring the butterfly. Measuring these, you're just turning the ruler. Instead of going across this way, you're turning the ruler and measuring up and down. So I'm going to line the 0 up with one end, and I can't do it in the space I have, but I would measure up instead of across. That's what it's asking on example 2 here. The only problem is you will need to have a ruler to do these measurements. I don't have a tool in the features on the computer that can give you a ruler. You may be able to find something that you can print, but it is going to be important to do these lessons that you have a ruler to use. I do know that I made in the beginning of the year kit in the sheet protector that you got, there was a bunch of inserts in the sheet protector, and in there was a ruler that you can cut and paste together, and that makes a ruler that you can use to measure on these. So you would need to go back and dig into the stuff you got at the very beginning of the year, back in August, and find those materials that were in that sheet protector, and that you can use as a whiteboard as well, to find that if you do not have a ruler at home that you can use, because you will need something that has inches on it that you can measure objects with. So that is the only challenge with doing this distance. You need a ruler to be able to measure these objects, and you need a ruler that has markings to at least 1/4 inch in order to be successful at completing these pages. So look in your supplies, look in your drawers at home, look in toolboxes for measurement that has inches on it. You'll need that to do problems like 4, 5, 6, and 7. You won't need it to do the estimation problems though. Even if you don't have a ruler, you can still complete the estimates for these objects when they give you multiple choice. So I can see the length of a whistle is probably not going to be 2 yards. It's probably smaller than 2 feet. I've never seen a whistle that was quite this big unless it was on some Nickelodeon show or something. The most reasonable estimate for a whistle like the caterpillar is going to be about 2 inches. That is more reasonable. Now a chalkboard is obviously much bigger. Choose the best length going across this chalkboard for what is reasonable as a measurement across the chalkboard. You can do that even without a ruler. Okay. You also do not need a ruler to complete these word problems. They are just thought problems and reasoning. So you can solve these problems without having a ruler on hand. If Patrice had a book that was 2 1/4 inches thick and stacked it on another book that was the same thickness, you can visualize that and figure out what kind of equation you're going to need to do. Yes, it's an equation. I'm not going to tell you what operation it is. Draw a picture over here if it helps you measure, or say, okay, this one's 2 1/4, and then I put another one on the top. How much is that? Do I need to add or subtract to figure out how tall the stack is? Helke found a stick that was 5 3/4 feet long. He needed that one that was about 5 feet. Will that stick work? So think about that. Will it work if he has 5 3/4 and he needs one that's 5? Okay, so these problems you can do even if you don't have a ruler. So you're not excused for the assignment just because you can't find a ruler at home. You still need to do these problems here. And you might not be able to do the beginning of the homework, but you can do the estimating and you can do the word problems here. And you should be able to fill in the blanks on these 12 through. You should be able to do at least 9 through 15 on the homework. Actually 3 through 15, because these are estimating as well. So no excuses. You don't get to skip out on the whole assignment if you don't have a ruler. You should be able to find one, and you should have one in your materials, but I don't want the excuse, oh, I didn't have a ruler, so I didn't do my work. Thank you. Keep being awesome, and I will see you at your work time.